There are places in Asia that do not appear on any tourist map. Places where the wind carries chants that no living monk remembers. Places where temples rot, but statues blink ever so slightly. Where the gates never close because something inside has not finished waiting. Tonight, we ascend a forgotten hill in the northern mist of Thailand, a place where faith once turned into obsession and devotion became a doorway. They say the monks left long ago, but the temple still echoes with footsteps, still breathes incense never lit by human hands. Welcome to Whispers of Asia, where folklore is never just legend, and where every story is a prayer whispered too late. This is not a tale of ghosts alone. It is a tale of what happens when a soul refuses to move on. This is The Temple Never Seals Its Gates. Are you ready to enter? Just don't kneel too long. Something might kneel back. There is a road in northern Thailand that no longer appears on GPS. It snakes upward through dense teakwood forests, past rice paddies that shimmer like glass, and into a hush that feels older than the trees themselves. It is not long, nor especially high, but locals call it the Road of Forgetting. No one lives up there anymore. No one is supposed to. And yet, the old temple at the summit, Wat Nong Sang, still stands. Not proudly, not defiantly, just still. Like a body no longer breathing, but refusing to decay. On an early morning thick with mountain mist, a novice monk named Preacha arrived at the base of that road with nothing more than a worn satchel, a saffron robe clinging damp to his skin, and a calm resolve that no one quite understood. He was barely 20, with a narrow frame and eyes that held both youth and weariness, a boy who had seen enough to want silence over salvation. He bowed to the villagers who had guided him that far and thanked them with both hands. But they did not bow back. One of them, an older man with a cloudy left eye and a missing thumb, looked at the monk with something like pity or warning. "You don't have to go up there, Luxit," he said quietly. "The temple hasn't had a real monk in 40 years, only spirits." Preacha smiled politely. "Then they must be lonely." The man's mouth twitched. He leaned in closer. "That place never locks its gates, even at night. Not because it's open to all, but because something inside has never left." The other villagers shifted uncomfortably. One woman muttered a short kata under her breath and turned away. The rest followed. Only the old man remained a moment longer, staring up toward the peak. "There's no shame in turning around, Nain. The spirits don't care for pride. They only want company." Then he too disappeared into the fog. The climb was steeper than it looked. Moss covered most of the stone steps, and the forest crept in tight on either side, as though nature itself had tried to reclaim what was once sacred. The air grew colder, thinner, and unnaturally still the farther Preacha went. No birds, no insects, only the rhythmic sound of his sandals pressing against the old stone path, and once the faint sound of a bell far in the distance. But there were no bells in the forest, only at the top. When Preacha finally reached the crest, the trees parted, and there it stood, Wat Nong Sang, a crumbling complex of red-tiled roofs and dark wooden eaves, weathered by decades of rain and neglect. The outer wall was mostly broken, vines crawling over the cracks like veins across pale skin. The central ubosot, the ordination hall, leaned ever so slightly, like a man too tired to stand fully upright. And yet, the gates were wide open. Tall, wooden, once lacquered in gold leaf, now stripped to bare, splintered wood, but open. Not ajar, not broken. Deliberately open, as though something inside had been waiting. Preacher stood there for a long moment. Not out of fear, but reverence. He had studied old temples, knew their architecture, their placement, their spiritual alignments. This one was wrong in subtle ways. The guardian statues at the gate, normally lions or nagas, were two weather-worn monks seated in meditation. One had no eyes, the other no mouth. He stepped through the gate. The temperature dropped. The temple grounds were larger than he expected. 3 buildings stood in various states of decay: the ubosot, a long vihan used for ceremonies, and a kuti where monks once slept. Grass grew wild, statues leaned, bells rusted in silence. But there was no sense of rot, no stench, only the strange quiet of a place held in spiritual suspension. Inside the ubosot, Preacher found the main statue, a large, seated Buddha carved from black stone, veined with white quartz. It sat atop a lotus pedestal, hands in the Bhumishparsha mudra, the earth-touching gesture. But the face of the statue was wrong. Its features were too human, not serene, not idealized like most sacred images, but lined with age. The cheeks sunken, the lips pursed, the eyes slightly hooded as though caught mid-blink. He felt a chill as he approached. The air thickened around the statue like walking underwater. A cold draft rolled down the back of his neck. There were no offering bowls, no incense trays, but there were burn marks on the floor near the base. Circular, repetitive, ritual marks. That first night, Preacher swept the prayer hall, lit his own incense, and began to chant softly. His voice echoed in the hollow space, trembling like a boy trying to sound like a man. His words rose up toward the statue, folded into the corners of the ancient hall, and disappeared into the high wooden beams where dust danced in moonlight. When he finished, he bowed deeply, and in that final silence, he thought he heard something shift. Not a sound, a presence, as if the hall had inhaled. He slept in the old kuti. The roof leaked, the walls creaked, but it was better than many nights he had spent on the streets before finding the robe. The thin mat felt soft under his back. He listened to the trees swaying in the wind outside. The air was cold, but he didn't shiver. He was used to being alone, and this place was quiet, peaceful even. But just before sleep took him, something made his eyes open again. A sound, so soft he almost thought he imagined it. Tap, tap, tap. A slow, deliberate tapping, like wood on stone, like the end of a monk's staff, walking through the ubosot, even though no one walked there anymore.
At dawn,
the temple grounds came alive in silver mist, not with people, not with prayers, but with quiet movement, the kind that doesn't stir the air, but unsettles the soul. Precha awoke early, as monks do, before the sun had cleared the treetops. The forest still murmured in hushed tones, wind threading through bamboo leaves like breath through prayer beads. But within the walls of Wat Nong Seng, nothing stirred. No bird song, no insects, not even the usual hum of nature returning to abandoned places. The silence was not peace. It was attention, as if the whole temple was watching him wake. After his morning ablutions, Preacher returned to the Ubasat, carrying a small tray of offerings he had brought from the village: bananas, jasmine garlands, candles, and 3 sticks of incense. The black stone Buddha sat unchanged, looming in the pale half-light. The face still looked too real, still too awake. He knelt before it and began his chants, soft at first, steady, measured, a rhythm of ancient syllables falling into the temple's dry air like water into a deep well. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. His voice echoed off the old teakwood beams above. Dust trembled in thin shafts of light. The incense rose slow, curling like fingers reaching upward. He opened his eyes. The statue hadn't moved. Of course it hadn't. But the garland he had placed was now on the floor, broken in half. He blinked, confused. Had he set it improperly? Had it slipped? He reached to pick it up, but froze. The incense was already burnt halfway through. He had just lit it, hadn't he? He looked at the candles. Both flames were still, steady, but one had melted wax halfway down the base, more than time should allow. His heart began to thrum, quietly, like a second chant underneath the one he had just recited. Outside, the sky was turning amber. He backed away slowly from the Buddha, bowing once, twice, and turned to inspect the rest of the temple, not just for spiritual maintenance, but because something deep in his bones told him this place demanded more than ritual. It demanded witnessing. The long Vihan to the east was in worse condition than the Ubasat. Its walls bore faded murals of the Jataka tales, stories of the Buddha's past lives, but some of the faces had been scratched out, not by time, not by rain, by hands. Fingernail marks, deep gouges, and over one of the scenes where the Bodhisattva feeds starving tigers with his own flesh, someone had drawn a single black circle, not painted, burned into the wood. Inside the Vihan, he found shattered prayer wheels, torn robes, and old alms bowls turned upside down. But what stopped him was the shrine in the farthest corner. It was a small altar, simple, wooden, likely used for personal prayers, but it had been broken in half, split down the center as if something had erupted out of it. The base was scorched, and on the stone underneath, charcoal symbols had been drawn in a language he didn't recognize. They weren't Thai. They weren't Pali. They were wrong. And yet, standing before them, he felt something ancient stir beneath his skin, like the syllables wanted to curl across his tongue, uninvited. He turned away quickly and left the hall. The kuti where he had slept was ordinary, at least on the surface. Old bedding, books too damaged by mold to read, a cracked water jar. But something in the room's layout
felt deliberately placed. A ring of string had been tied to the corners of the room, like a boundary, and in the center, directly beneath the open sky, was a single black thread hanging from the rafters. It swayed. There was no wind. Preacher reached up to touch it and stopped. His vision blurred for just a second, and he heard something that sounded like chanting underwater. A voice, slow, thick, muffled. He stepped back, and the thread went still. That night, he chanted again, this time with more care. He avoided the broken shrine, avoided the thread. He sat before the black stone Buddha, incense freshly lit, and began to repeat the sutras he knew by heart. Ittipiso Bhagava Arahang Sama Sambuddho. But something was off. The echo in the hall was too fast, like a second voice just slightly behind his. Not a true echo, not a reflection, but an imitation. And presence repeating after him, learning his rhythm, mimicking his voice. He stopped chanting. The echo did not. It continued for 2, 3 more words before falling silent. The air was cold. He could see his breath. In Thailand's summer heat, that shouldn't happen. He tried to sleep, but the tapping came again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it was closer. Not from the ubosat, but from outside his kuti. He lay still, listening. The tapping moved along the wall, slowly, deliberately, like someone walking with a wooden staff, circling the building. Then, silence, but only for a moment, because after that came the creak of the door handle. It didn't open, but it turned. Once, twice, then stillness. No footsteps retreating, no wind, just the slow return of that terrible silence. At dawn, Preacher opened the door. There were no footprints, no signs of movement, no broken branches or disturbed grass, only a line of ash, thin as a thread, drawn in a circle around his kuti. He swept it away with shaking hands, and as the sun rose, he looked toward the ubosat again. The gates were open, but something was different. The statue inside was facing just a little more to the left than it had been the day before.
There are different kinds of footsteps in the world. Some are heavy, like a man coming home drunk. Some are urgent, like a child running from a lie. But the ones that haunt you most are measured, steady, rhythmic, almost calm, like the walk of someone who isn't in a hurry because they already know where you're going. By the third night at Wat Nong Sang, Priyecha had begun to count the taps. He didn't mean to. He never intended to, but his mind did it anyway, like a reflex, a second heartbeat pulsing under his breath. Tap, tap, tap. Always spaced 4 seconds apart. Always beginning just after sunset. Always circling, like a loop of ritual. The staff, if that's what it was, tapped against stone, then grass, then wood, each surface singing its own version of the same sound. And sometimes, when he closed his eyes, Priyecha could imagine the weight behind it. Not just footsteps, but intent. He tried to explain it away, tried to convince himself it was a branch falling, an animal, a trick of echo and wind.
But deep down, he knew this wasn't nature. This was a pattern, and patterns meant someone was trying to communicate. That morning, he woke early again. His skin felt colder than it should. His robe smelled faintly of smoke. When he stepped outside his kuti, he found the incense tray, the one he had placed the day before, had been moved. It now rested at the foot of the black stone Buddha, exactly centered. He hadn't moved it, and the offerings, the bananas, the flowers, were not only rotted, but crawling with flies, black and bloated, as if they had been left for weeks. The petals had turned to pulp. The bananas had caved in on themselves, oozing from the inside like wounds. Yet he had placed them less than 12 hours ago. Time moved differently here, or something inside the temple was accelerating decay. Later that day, Priyecha explored the outer edges of the temple grounds, hoping for signs of normalcy, animals, birds, maybe even another monk from a nearby temple. He found none. Instead, near the edge of the forest, beneath a frangipani tree heavy with dead blossoms, he discovered an old walking staff buried halfway into the ground. Its handle was smooth, worn by years of use, but its tip, the end that touched the earth, was darkened, stained. He knelt beside it. His hand hovered over the shaft. Something told him not to touch it. He touched it anyway, and instantly, his ears filled with the sound of chanting, not from outside, not from the forest, from within his own skull. Words he didn't know, cadences not taught in any temple. He dropped the staff. The sound stopped. His hands were shaking. Back inside the ubosat, the statue loomed. Its eyes, stone though they were, seemed deeper today, as if the quartz had darkened, as if the figure was settling in. He swept the floors again, laid fresh flowers, lit incense with trembling fingers. And then, for the first time, he asked aloud, "Who are you?" His voice felt too loud in the hall. It echoed once, then died. He waited. No answer. Only the soft hiss of burning incense, and something else. Something quieter. A sliding sound. He turned. One of the smaller statues, a bronze image of a kneeling monk, had shifted. Only by an inch, but it had moved. Its head now turned slightly toward him. That night, the tapping came again. Only this time, it didn't stay outside. Priyecha was seated in the ubosat, chanting by candlelight. The wind was still. The hall was silent. And then, tap, right outside the open temple door. Then another, closer. And another. He kept chanting, louder, faster. The taps grew in sync with his voice, like a metronome, like a ritual drum, like someone pacing the aisles between pews, waiting for the moment his breath would falter. He dared not stop. But when his candle went out, snuffed not by wind, but by presence, he screamed, and the tapping stopped, just like that. He woke the next morning on the temple floor. His robes were soaked with sweat. His nails were dirty. A smear of ash was across his forehead, not his doing. And when he looked up, the statue of the black stone Buddha had a garland around its neck again. Whole, fresh, white jasmine, still wet with dew. He hadn't placed it there. Later that day, he returned to the village. He needed answers. He found Uncle Tewi at the edge of a market stall, chewing betel nut and carving something into bamboo. When Priyecha approached, the man flinched, not out of surprise, out of recognition. "It's following you now," he muttered. "I can smell it, like old candles and wet stone." Priyecha knelt. What happened there before it was abandoned? Tewi looked away. The abbot was powerful, too powerful. People said he cured disease, found lost children. He could stop storms with a chant. He leaned in, voice low. But power is a hungry thing, and the old man, he got tired of dying. The story came in pieces, wrapped in shame. The abbot had studied Sayasat, Thai black magic, in secret. Forbidden texts, ancient chants not meant for monks. He wanted to transfer his soul into a vessel, to bypass death, to continue guiding his followers. But such rituals require sacrifice, fresh blood, willing ignorance. His disciples discovered him too late. They tried to stop him, but failed. They didn't kill him. They couldn't. So they trapped him in the very statue now seated at the head of the hall. The ritual was unfinished, the curse half-bound, the soul incomplete, but still aware, still waiting. Priyecha returned to the temple that night, throat dry, heart pounding. The gates were open, always open. Inside the ubosat, the candles were already lit. He had not lit them. The smell of jasmine and rot filled the air. He approached the statue, and for the first time, he saw it smile. Just a twitch of the lips, a movement no stone should make. But it smiled, and beneath his feet, he heard the tap of a staff from inside the statue.
By the fourth morning, Priyecha no longer asked himself if something was wrong. He asked himself how long he had left. Sleep no longer came easily. When it did, it brought dreams of ash, of stone faces pressed close to his own, of chanting that started inside his body and echoed outward, not as words, but as hunger. He dreamed of standing barefoot at the altar, arms lifted, offering himself like fruit to something that didn't speak, only watched. The temple grounds grew stranger with each sunrise. Insects returned, but not in the way they should. They circled only the offerings, swarming too fast, too thick. Bananas spoiled in hours. Fresh marigolds browned by dusk. Lotus petals bloomed, then shriveled mid-prayer. Decay was faster here now, as though time flowed differently around the altar, or something nearby was feeding off life and pulling it through faster than the world could keep up. That morning, Priyecha knelt in front of the black stone Buddha, trembling hands arranging his tray. A peeled banana, 3 sticks of incense, a small carved elephant, and a fresh string of jasmine garland. He bowed low. May this offering be pure. May my heart be still. May I walk the path with right view. He closed his eyes and chanted, but halfway through the verse, he gagged. The smell hit him first, sweet and rotting, a punch of overripe fruit and wet soil. He opened his eyes and found the banana had already turned black, splitting open from the middle, like it had been baking in the sun for days. The garland had browned, flies clung to the petals. The carved elephant had split down the center, as though struck by heat. He'd been kneeling there for less than 15 minutes. Later that day,
Preacher walked the grounds again, trying to distract his thoughts, trying to chase the cold breath that seemed to follow him everywhere. But something had changed outside the ubasat. In the far corner of the garden, half covered in fallen leaves and moss, he found a wooden photo frame. Weather-warped, mildewed, almost lost to time. He picked it up. Inside was a photograph, yellowed and cracking, of 5 monks. 3 were young. One looked familiar, a thin, pale face, gentle smile. The 5th was an older monk, seated in the middle. His robes darker, his eyes faintly blurred, but not by age, but by intentional scratching. Someone had scraped out the eyes, deep gouges, over and over, like they couldn't bear to be looked at. That night, Preacher placed the photo in front of the Buddha statue. He wanted something, an answer, an acknowledgement, or even a warning. "Is this you?" he asked softly. The hall was silent, but the incense lit itself. All 3 sticks, untouched, hissed to life. A flicker of flame, a puff of smoke. No wind, no match, just fire, as if in reply. He left the statue and stepped outside. The night was thick with fog, the moon half veiled. From the forest came the distant sound of bells, temple bells, but there was no other temple nearby. He stood perfectly still and heard them again. 1 chime, 2, 3, then silence. Then footsteps. Not his. Soft, bare, wet, walking on grass toward him from the tree line. Preacher turned slowly. There was nothing there, but the fog parted just enough for him to see a shape, small, bowed, moving just at the edge of the trees. A monk? No. Too small. Too low to the ground. Too broken. It disappeared before he could call out. The next morning, Preacher found a dead chicken at the gate. Its head was still attached, but its eyes had been gouged out, just like the photo. The body was still warm. It hadn't died naturally. Beside it, a small woven pouch made of palm leaf. Inside, dirt, a twist of black hair, and a carved wooden tongue. He knew what this was. Sayasit, a ritual curse, not against him, but to appease something watching from the hill. The villagers had left it. A sacrifice. That afternoon, Preacher went down the path to confront the village, but when he reached the halfway mark, the forest shifted. The trees bent slightly inward, the path looped, twisted, returned to itself. He tried again, walked faster, same result. He was caught in a circle. No matter which way he walked, he ended up back at the temple gate. It wasn't just that the temple wanted him to stay. It was that the outside world no longer wanted him back. He sat in the viharn until nightfall, breathing slowly, trying to anchor his thoughts. The symbols on the floor, the ones he had seen before, were darker now, oily, as if fresh, and they pulsed faintly. He stood to leave, and saw the statue in the ubasat again, through the open door, across the courtyard. But this time, there was a second figure kneeling in front of it. Not stone, not still, alive. A body in robes, chanting. Preacher stumbled forward, crossed the grass, reached the doorway, and the figure was gone. No footprints, no breath, only the scent of burnt jasmine and the faint, lingering echo of his own voice, chanting in a tone deeper than his own. That night, Preacher sat in the main hall. He didn't chant, he didn't pray. He simply stared at the black stone Buddha, trying to hold still while his body betrayed him with trembling. He was beginning to understand something terrible. He wasn't losing control. He was being replaced. Bit by bit, voice by voice, presence by presence. He closed his eyes to rest them, just for a moment, and saw in the darkness of his mind a vision. A monk seated in lotus posture, flesh sloughing from bone, maggots pouring from his mouth, his eyes opening slowly to reveal only stone underneath. And his voice, soft, cracked, familiar. "You chant well, child, but you must give more than words." When Preacher woke, the candles had gone out, and in the corner of the room, one of the small bronze monk statues had moved again. Its head was turned fully toward him now, and at its feet was a single, unpeeled banana, already black, already split, already rotting.
The fifth night came wrapped in fog, not the soft, drifting kind that kisses the trees and dances through bamboo leaves. This fog was thick, unmoving, a curtain of pale rot that clung to the temple grounds and swallowed sound. Even the crickets were silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Preacher lit the candles slowly, carefully. His fingers trembled around the matchstick, not from fear, from something far worse: recognition. Because the presence in the temple, the one he had once prayed to, once tried to appease, now felt like something he already knew, something that had been inside him for a while, waiting for the right night to speak. And tonight it would. He knelt before the black stone Buddha as usual, chants ready on his tongue, breath steady, eyes half-lidded. He had learned by now that the statue did not react to silence, only to devotion, only to ritual. So he began, softly. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. The syllables rolled out like incense smoke, smooth, slow, reverent. He reached the second verse, then the third, and as his mouth moved, his breath caught, because somewhere in the walls, in the rafters, in the hollow of the hall, another voice was chanting with him. At first it mimicked him, word for word, a half-second behind. Then it began to merge, to overlap, to anticipate. It spoke his next word before he did. It knew the chants, not like a student learning, but like a master remembering. Preacher froze. His lips still moved, but the voice coming from his mouth no longer felt his. The voice had changed. It was lower, older, wet with something, mucus, blood, something spiritual and spoiled. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. The cadence was ancient, but the intention felt wrong.
not reverent, not peaceful, but hungry, as if the chant was not praise, but invocation, a key in a lock, and the door was opening. Preacher gasped and stopped. Instantly, the other voice stopped too. The silence that followed was alive. He opened his eyes and saw for the first time the statue blink. Not fully, just a flicker, just enough to shatter his faith that it was ever truly stone. He stumbled back, breath ragged, hands shaking. The air in the ubosat had changed, now thick, damp, heavy as cloth soaked in sweat. And behind him, something whispered, not in Thai, not in Pali, but in a language older than both, a sound like wind through dry teeth. He turned sharply, but there was no one there, only the smaller bronze monk statues, all of them now facing him, their heads turned, their mouths parted. That night he dreamed of chanting again, but in the dream he stood in front of the Buddha, facing it, while another version of him knelt below, a second preacher, eyes glazed, mouth moving, but the voice that came out was the abbot's, old, dry, rotting. And in the dream the Buddha's lips finally moved, just once. One voice is not enough. Two must become one. He screamed, but no sound came out. His throat was dry. His mouth tasted of metal and ash. And on his hands, streaked across the palms, were black smudges, as though he had been gripping incense coals. He hadn't touched them, not while awake. He fled the kuti in bare feet, rushing toward the village trail. He didn't care if it circled. He didn't care if he was trapped. He had to try. But halfway through the forest path, he stopped, because he was no longer alone. Ahead of him stood a woman, old, bent, wrapped in a green shawl so worn it looked like dried seaweed. She held no lantern, but she saw him perfectly. Her face was tattooed, not with ink, but with faded script across her forehead and lips. Ancient kata, protective symbols, sayasat. "You're the one it chose," she whispered. He didn't speak. "We thought it would take a villager, but you made it easy. You pray too much. You listen when you should run." Preacher finally found his voice. "Who are you?" The woman smiled, a broken, crooked thing. "I'm the last one who escaped. I burned out my ears to silence the chant." She lifted her hair, revealed blackened earlobes, charred. "But you're already speaking with its tongue. You just haven't noticed." Then she vanished into the mist, like a memory dissolving mid-thought. Back in the temple, the sky was violet with dying sun. The ubosat's doors were open. They never close, but tonight they looked welcoming. Inside, incense was already lit, 3 sticks, a garland of white jasmine on the floor, and in the center of the hall, a new statue, one he hadn't seen before, another monk, thin, tall, stone fingers clasped in prayer, eyes carved open, staring upward. Its face looked like his. He fell to his knees. He chanted again, but not because he wanted to, because the words came, unbidden, out of his throat, without his consent. Iti, pi, so, bhagava, arahang. His voice cracked, and somewhere in the rafters, the staff tapping resumed, closer, heavier. And when he looked up again, the black stone Buddha smiled.
They call it Sayasat, the shadow beneath the robe. The secret teachings whispered between breaths, passed not through scriptures, but through scars. It is not Buddhist doctrine. It is older, hungrier, born of jungle spirits, corpse oil lamps, and monks who stayed too long in the dark. Most temples pretend it never existed, but every forest monk hears about it, and every forest knows its name. On the sixth day, the temple stopped pretending to be abandoned. The bell rang once at sunrise, loud and clear. Preacher bolted upright in the kuti, robe soaked in cold sweat, ears ringing from the strike. No one had touched the bell for decades. He knew that because he had checked the rusted pulley himself. The bell rope had been severed long ago, but now it rang again, as if announcing someone's arrival, or perhaps their return. Preacher went to the ubosot immediately. The sun was barely a whisper on the horizon, casting long shadows across the prayer hall, but the doors, as always, were wide open. Inside, incense curled in unnatural spirals. On the floor before the Buddha statue, a scroll lay unrolled. Preacher stared at it, breath tight. He hadn't seen it before. He would have noticed. Its parchment was thick, dark, and slick like old skin. The symbols weren't Thai, not Khmer, not Pali. They looked carved, not written. The ink a dull red, the color of dried blood mixed with charcoal. At the top, a single phrase repeated in a looping script. Sangwiti Sayasat, ritual of soul holding. He knew immediately what it was, the forbidden kata, the ritual chant used to bind the soul to a vessel, a statue, a doll, even a corpse, to cheat death and tether the self beyond the body's decay. It was said to be older than Theravada Buddhism itself, a practice of warlocks and corrupted monks, one that required 5 elements: a fresh corpse buried under the temple moon, a sacred object to house the soul, an uninterrupted chant across 7 nights, the blood of a disciple, and a willing sacrifice standing at the temple gates, the final offering, the soul's last key. Preacher backed away, but his eyes wouldn't leave the scroll, not because he wanted to read it, but because part of him already knew what it said. The phrases, the structure, the rhythm. It was familiar, not learned, remembered, as if something inside him had once spoken it, in another tongue, in another life. And now it whispered again, "You are the vessel, you are the door." He staggered out into the sunlight, desperate for air, for clarity, for proof that he was still himself. He wandered the edge of the grounds until he found the crumbling meditation hut near the rear of the property. He hadn't entered it before.
It was collapsed halfway, vines eating through the roof. But something pulled him toward it. Inside, beneath a broken section of floor, he found the second scroll. This one hidden in a ceramic urn, wrapped in cloth, sealed with wax and copper nails. It hadn't been opened in years, and it wasn't meant to be. But he opened it. Inside, a diary written by a disciple. The entries were erratic, hurried, stained with wax and fingerprints. Master has begun chanting the forbidden verses. He says he has seen Mara, and Mara granted him a path beyond death. We found the body buried behind the ubosot, fresh, not from the village. I no longer sleep. The chants echo in my bones. We sealed the ritual. We broke the circle. We trapped him in stone. But he still watches. The statue is not empty. He speaks through the smoke. We will bury this. We will leave. No one must ever open this temple again. Preacher dropped the scroll, backed away. His heart raced, because now everything made sense. The statue's eyes, the moving monks, the voice in his throat, the accelerated rot, the incense burning on its own. The temple was the ritual, and he was its continuation. He ran to the edge of the forest again. No path, only trees that curved in ways trees shouldn't curve, branches that reached too low, too purposefully. The ground pulled at his feet like soft clay. He screamed. No echo returned, because the forest was now part of the trap. That night, he did not chant. He tried to stay away from the ubosot, tried to stay awake, tried to keep his mind still. But sometime after midnight, his legs moved on their own, barefoot, silent, straight toward the main hall. The door creaked open. Inside, the statue waited, lit by 20 candles, all lit, all perfectly still. The scroll lay in front of the altar, again, open to the final verse. Preacher walked toward it, hands trembling, knees weak. He tried to resist, but the voice was already building in his throat. Not his voice, the abbot's voice, a voice of ash and stone. As he knelt, he whispered, "What do you want?" And the answer came not in words, but in images. A monk sitting in a ring of flame, a grave dug under moonlight, a boy kneeling at temple gates, blood smeared across stone, a soul hollowed out and waiting. And then silence, except for one sound. Tap, tap, tap. The staff, growing louder, moving inside the statue, pacing, pacing, waiting for the seventh night. Preacher opened his eyes. The scroll had vanished, but in his palm was a fragment of it. One word burned into the parchment. Tawai, to offer.
There's a silence that isn't empty. It doesn't soothe. It waits. And inside Wat Nang Sang, silence had become a presence all its own. Not absence of sound, but the anticipation of something about to speak. And by the seventh night, it did. Preacher no longer counted the days. He had stopped trying to measure time in mornings and evenings. Instead, he marked it by how far his voice had changed. His chants no longer felt like offerings. They felt like agreements. Each word peeled away something human and layered something else, ancient, rooted in stone, carved from forgotten intent. That evening he lit no candles. He knelt before the statue in darkness, a single stick of incense in his hand, unlit. And yet, as he lowered it, a spark ignited at the tip, slow and deliberate, as though lips had blown across it from behind. The flame coiled like a tongue, and Preacher heard it, not in his ears, not in the room, inside him, a whisper, slow, low, unmistakably intimate. "You brought me back, child." Preacher's hands trembled. "I didn't mean to." The voice was dry, cracked, like earth long without rain. "Intention doesn't matter in places built for authoring. You chanted, you bled, you stayed." The statue did not move, but the whisper grew stronger. He felt it crawl through his ribs, curl behind his teeth. "You are the echo, I am the sound. Together, we are the chant." Preacher clenched his fists. "Who are you?" And this time it answered with clarity, a name that tasted like ashes when spoken. Pra Ajahn Kajon. The old abbot. Preacher shook his head. "You're dead." "I am unfinished." A pause. "They broke the ritual, sealed me, trapped me in silence, but the temple never closed." Another pause. The voice softened, "Because it waited for a voice, for you." Suddenly, the incense cracked in half, falling to the floor, the flame extinguished. Darkness pressed in from all sides, and the whisper returned, closer now. "You wear the robe well. You pray with reverence. You are pure, but lonely. Loneliness is the softest door." Preacher stood up. "No!" The air shifted. A wind rose from nowhere. The smaller monk statues all around the hall turned their heads with slow, echoing creaks. The abbot's voice deepened. "I am not asking." Preacher ran from the obosat, breath ragged. But the temple had grown alive. The bells rang behind him, 3 chimes in rhythm. The grass hissed beneath his feet. As he passed the kuti, he saw his reflection in the old water basin. He froze, because the face looking back at him was not entirely his own. The shape of the brow was the same, but the eyes darker. The mouth thinner, smirking. The face of the abbot beginning to surface through his own. He staggered back, falling into the dirt, and for the first time since arriving, he screamed, not in fear, but in fury. "What do you want from me?" The wind answered, a voice from the trees, from the cracked tiles, from the vines on the walls, to finish what they could not, to open the gate, to complete the offering. Later that night, he found himself standing again in front of the statue, not knowing how he got there. Time had become elastic, reality thin. He looked into the Buddha's carved eyes, and they seemed to look back. Then slowly, from the base of the statue, a crack opened, and from within it crawled something. Not an animal, not a ghost, but a shadow shaped like a man kneeling, made entirely of smoke. It slithered forward, then stopped, and spoke in his own voice.
If you finish the chant, you won't be alone anymore." Preacher wept. He didn't want to, but the tears came, because something about that sentence rang true. He was tired, he was alone, and the temple was warm, even in its wrongness. The shadow leaned in. "Just 7 more verses, then you'll feel whole." He collapsed to the floor, throat dry, and before blacking out, he whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore." And the last thing he heard was the statue's voice, closer than ever. "You are me, and I am ready."
By the 8th night, the temple no longer needed candles, because darkness had made itself at home. It began with the small things. The sun set earlier. The sky grayed faster. Even during the day, shadows pooled unnaturally in corners where light should have touched, as though the temple had decided that illumination was no longer welcome. And the strange part was, Preacher no longer questioned it. He still moved through the halls, sweeping, chanting, arranging offerings, but not like before. Not with the clarity of faith, but with the heaviness of habit. The rituals had become automatic. His lips moved on their own. His hands placed incense he didn't remember lighting. His voice echoed even before he spoke. And sometimes his own chanting sounded foreign, as if someone else was borrowing his body. That morning, he tried to light a candle in the kuti. It flickered, then died. He tried again. The flame snapped backward, as if blown from inside the room. He checked for wind. There was none. He tried the main hall next. 3 candles, fresh wax, no breeze. He struck a match, but the moment he held it near the wick, the entire candle melted, collapsed in on itself, like it had been under the sun for hours, even though the room was cold, even though he hadn't even lit it. It was then he realized something deeply wrong. The temple no longer accepted light. Not from fire, not from sun, not even from reflection. Even the mirror in the rear hall, once covered in dust, now showed nothing at all. He stood before it and saw only the room behind him, not himself, as if he had been erased. Preacher sat in the viharn, knees drawn to chest, back against the wall. He no longer sought prayer, he sought escape. But escape had become a memory, distant, laughable. Even when he ran toward the trees, he always found himself back at the gate. Even when he closed his eyes to sleep, he woke up kneeling, sometimes in front of the statue, sometimes with ashes on his hands, once with blood beneath his nails. He never knew where it came from. By midday, the sky had dimmed again. It wasn't rain, it wasn't fog, it was something thicker, like the world itself had turned away from this place. A spiritual eclipse, a cutting off. And the strangest part? The birds no longer passed overhead, not even to perch, as though they had learned what he had not. That evening, Preacher entered the ubosat, and for the first time, there was no incense, no smell of rot, no echo, just stillness. But on the wall behind the black stone Buddha, a shape had appeared, not drawn, not carved, burned, a figure in lotus posture, identical to the statue, but glowing faintly red in the grain of the wood, and written beneath it, in dark curling script, Wan Sutai Kong Sang, the last day of light. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the kuti with a candle in his hand, holding the match, staring at the wick,
daring the darkness to let him try one more time. But the candle cracked in his hand before he could strike it, split clean down the middle. Wax spilled across his lap like milk, and in the pooling shadow on the floor, he saw something rise. Not a figure, not a ghost, a reflection of the black stone Buddha. Even though it wasn't there, even though he was nowhere near the ubosat, the statue was with him now. He whispered, "What do you want?" And the room whispered back, not with words, but with heat. A wave of warmth pulsed from the ground, from the walls, from inside his bones. A warmth that made him dizzy, not comforting, consuming, like standing too close to fire. He crawled to the door. The grass outside had turned gray. The moon was gone. And all around the edges of the temple, the trees had begun to lean inward, not from storm, not from time, but like spectators closing in, a silent audience, waiting for the ritual's final act. Preacher looked to the sky, and for a moment, just one, he saw a second moon, red, low, hung between branches. And in its face, carved by cloud and shadow, was the outline of a monk's face, smiling, eyes open, mouth closed, waiting. He fell to the ground, and for the first time, he chanted without meaning to, not aloud, but in his mind, in his blood, the words coming faster now, finishing verses he had never learned. And in his chest, something knocked, once, twice, like a hand from the inside. He closed his eyes, and the world whispered back, "The temple no longer needs light, it needs completion."
The temple had no map, no records, no inscriptions, but old places remember. And Wat Nong Sang remembered what was buried beneath it. It began with a dream. Preacher stood barefoot in the prayer hall, but the floor was gone. Only earth beneath him, dark, wet, freshly turned soil. He dropped to his knees, and his hand sank into the ground as though it were water. He felt fingers beneath the surface, not his, reaching upward, grasping. He tried to scream, but his mouth filled with dirt. And the last thing he saw before waking was the black stone Buddha watching from above, sinking slowly into the earth. He jolted awake in the kuti, lungs burning, but his hands were covered in mud, real mud, under his nails, streaked down his wrists, and beneath the sleeves of his robe, bruises in the shape of fingers, reaching upward. That morning, he searched the temple grounds, desperate for something, proof, explanation, anything real. And behind the ubosat, hidden behind thick underbrush and half-collapsed walls, he found a narrow stairway, stone steps leading down. He had never seen it before, and yet somehow it felt familiar, like something once forgotten had opened itself again. He descended slowly, no light, only the smell of damp stone and something older, the unmistakable scent of earth and decay. The passage twisted, curved, then opened into a chamber, a crypt. There were no coffins, no formal altars, just 3 shallow graves, marked only by stones stacked into crude mounds. But the markings on the wall told the story, not in words, in images, carved directly into the stone. 3 monks kneeling, one with his mouth open in chant, one covering his eyes, one holding a dagger.
Above them, a fourth figure towered, faceless, robed, hands outstretched. Behind it, a Buddha statue with open eyes, and below it, blood dripping into a sealed circle. Pricha staggered back. The mural wasn't just ritual art, it was a confession. This was where they stopped him, where the disciples tried to sever the ritual, but not by exorcism, by sacrifice. He knelt at the first grave. It had split open slightly, as if something had risen. Bones poked through the earth. The second grave was sealed tight. The third was empty. Fresh dirt, no remains. And then, in the silence, he heard it. Dripping, soft, rhythmic. He looked up. From the ceiling above the empty grave, a crack ran across the stone, and from it, blood, thin, steady, and warm, dripping into the soil, into the void, feeding it. He turned to flee, but in the tunnel behind him, a figure stood, tall, shrouded, motionless. A monk, but not alive. His robes were burned to the hem, and his face was carved from black stone, eyes open, mouth sealed shut, and in his hand a staff. Tap, tap. Pricha collapsed to the floor, crawling backward, but when he blinked, the figure was gone, and all that remained was the echo of the staff fading into the walls. Later, above ground, Pricha stood before the main hall. His legs shook, his voice failed, but still he whispered, "Why me?" And from inside the hall, the abbot's voice answered, closer now, clearer, "Because your faith is stronger than your fear." Pricha wanted to run, wanted to scream, but something inside him agreed, something deeper than thought, something older than his name, a whisper born in the temple's belly, a voice that had been waiting decades to be heard again, and now it was inside him. That night he chanted again. He didn't mean to. His mouth moved before his mind did. His knees bent before he gave the order. He sat in front of the Buddha statue, back straight, eyes forward, palms pressed, and the words flowed. Not learned, not remembered, inherited. He chanted until dawn. No light came, only the smell of blood and ash. And beneath him, through the wood and stone, he felt the graves shift and the soil breathe. Because one soul had been taken, one grave had been emptied, and now only one offering remained, to finish the ritual, to free the abbot, to replace the disciple. Temples are built as sanctuaries, but every sanctuary needs a threshold, a place where the sacred ends and the unknown begins. At Wat Nong Sang, that threshold was the front gate, and after 10 nights, Pricha finally understood. The gate was never left open by accident. It was left open by design, not for monks to enter, but for souls to offer themselves. He sat by the entrance at dusk, legs crossed, arms wrapped around his knees. The gates stood wide on rusted hinges, but tonight the wind didn't move them. Nothing did. And yet they breathed, not with sound, not with sway, but with presence, as if something beyond them waited patiently for a visitor to arrive, or perhaps waited for him to leave. But he couldn't. He'd tried dozens of times. The path always looped back, the forest always folded in. Now he realized why. Because he was never meant to leave through the gate. He was meant to guard it, to become it, to lure others across. The teachings came back to him in flashes, not from books, not from temples, from the scroll, from Sayasat. The fifth requirement, the one the abbot had never completed. A soul must cross the threshold, willingly, with offering in hand, with devotion in heart. It didn't need to be a monk, just someone with belief, someone willing to kneel, someone willing to be seen. And Preacher knew the truth then. The abbot had waited decades, bound in stone, held in silence, until someone, pure, lonely, faithful, would reopen the gate and prepare the grounds. Someone to light the path for another, to draw the final soul. That someone was Preacher. But he wasn't the final offering. He was the bait. The realization struck like cold iron. He was never the chosen vessel. He was the voice that summoned it, the chant that echoed outward, and soon someone would hear it. That evening, just after the temple bell rang once without a hand to pull it, Preacher saw movement at the base of the hill. Far off, a figure, walking, slowly, carrying something. He squinted through the haze. A child. No, a boy. No older than 10, wearing white, holding a silver bowl. Preacher ran to the gate. The boy was climbing the path now, barefoot, eyes fixed upward, his expression blank, peaceful, devoted. A smile on his lips, as if he'd heard the call in a dream and simply obeyed. Preacher stepped outside the gate, the first time he had done so in days. The wind stilled. The trees stopped rustling. Even the insects held their breath. The world paused, because the ritual was nearing its end. And the boy was the final note. "No," Preacher whispered. "Not him, not like this." But deep within him another voice rose, familiar now, warm, patient, triumphant. "He comes willingly. He brings the offering. You opened the gate. Now let it close." The boy reached the threshold. His silver bowl held jasmine, incense, and a single white egg, symbol of life, symbol of purity. He knelt before the open gate, pressed his forehead to the earth, whispered a prayer, and began to cry, not in fear, but in devotion, as if his spirit already knew what was being asked and had accepted it. Preacher backed away. He felt the heat rising from the earth. He felt the vibration of chanting, not from the air, but from his own bones. He wasn't speaking, but the chant filled him. Let the soul enter. Let the shell awaken. Let the gates be sealed. He looked at the boy, then at the temple, and for a moment he saw through time. The abbot in his final days, kneeling before the statue, skin flaking, soul already half departed. His disciples dragging corpses into the earth, a fire that never consumed flesh, only names. And above it all, the gate, always open, always waiting. Preacher screamed, "Take me instead!" The chanting stopped. The wind froze, and deep within the temple, the statue cracked. A single hairline fracture running from the Buddha's left eye down to its heart. The boy looked up, his lips parted. "Am I chosen?" Preacher's voice broke. "No, you are free! Go, please, run!" But the forest behind the boy had disappeared. Only fog remained. The path was gone. There was no going back. Only forward, only through. And from the temple the sound returned. Tap, tap, tap. The staff, pacing again. This time closer than ever. Inside the walls, inside the hall, inside him. Preacher fell to his knees, and as the boy crossed the gate, as his feet touched temple soil, the wind blew outward, and the gates slammed shut for the first time in 70 years.
When a temple gate closes, it should bring peace. But when the gates of Wat Nang Song slammed shut for the first time in 70 years, it was not a benediction, it was a signal. The ritual had begun its final phase, and all that was left was for the body to accept the soul. Preacher hadn't slept. He couldn't. Each time his eyes closed, he saw himself standing in the ubosat, draped in the abbot's darkened robes, voice deepened into gravel. He watched himself chanting verses he didn't understand, while the black stone Buddha smiled with every word. The dreams were no longer metaphor. They were instruction. The boy, the final offering, had not spoken since crossing the gate. He remained seated outside the ubosat, palms pressed together, eyes closed as if meditating or listening. But for what? Or for whom? Preacher tried to speak to him, tried to shake him free, but when he touched the boy's shoulder, the boy whispered, not in his own voice, but in the abbot's, "You opened the door. Now finish the prayer." By late evening, the temple grounds had changed. The sky remained dim even after nightfall. Not dark, dim, as though light and shadow had fused. The air vibrated slightly. Chants echoed softly through the trees, though no one spoke, and the statues had moved again. Every monk statue now stood in a circle around the ubosat, facing inward, waiting. Preacher entered the prayer hall and saw it, the mirror, the one from the rear viharn. It had been moved. Now it sat upright in the center of the ubosat, facing the Buddha statue. And in front of it, a mat, waiting, inviting, dreadful. He stepped closer. His reflection stared back at him. At first, it was familiar. Tired eyes, hollow cheeks, the boy monk he had always known. But then, it blinked. Out of sync. He had not blinked, and still the reflection did. He turned his head left, the reflection turned right, then smiled, and raised a hand, even though Preacher's hands remained at his sides. "This is how it begins," the reflection said. Its voice was older, smoother, and terrifying in its calm. Preacher stepped back, but the reflection did not. It stepped forward, pressed its hands together, bowed. "Your body is ready. Let us complete what was broken." Preacher fled, out of the ubosat, back to the kuti, back to the dark, but the mirror was already there somehow. Leaning in the corner,
the reflection already waiting. It no longer mimicked him. It studied him, like an artisan measuring the fit of a vessel. And then the chanting began again, not from his mouth, from the walls, from the trees, from the soil. The same verse repeated over and over. Sang Witi, Chana Nai, Pratama. Over and over, building, pulling, and inside him the urge to join, to chant with it, to merge. He bit his tongue until he tasted blood, held it there, let the pain ground him. But even pain was temporary here. Even resistance wore thin. By midnight, he returned to the Ubosat. The boy was still kneeling, unmoving. The statue still surrounded the hall, and the mirror was now in front of the Buddha statue, facing outward, facing him. He knelt, as if guided, no strength left to fight, only breath, only echo. The mirror shimmered faintly, not with light, but with recognition. And when he looked again, the reflection was no longer him. It was the abbot, robes pristine, skin pale, eyes heavy with knowledge and greed, and lips moving. Speak with me. Preacher opened his mouth, and the chant flowed, perfect, fluent, flawless. The mirror chanted back, and then they chanted together, one voice, one will. The walls trembled, dust fell from the beams, the incense trays lifted off the floor, suspended by windless force. And behind the mirror, the statue cracked again. The fracture deepened, running down the chest, reaching the base. The stone heart inside it began to beat, once, then again, then faster. Preacher tried to stop, tried to close his lips, but his body no longer obeyed. The voice flowed through him, and the mirror smiled. Its hand raised, palm out, inviting him forward. He stood, walked to the glass, raised his own hand, touched it, and for the first time, the mirror felt warm. Flesh, not glass. And then it pulled. Preacher gasped. His fingers began to sink into the reflection, as though it were water, as though it were another body. The reflection did not resist. It absorbed. Behind him, the Buddha statue exhaled. The boy bowed lower, and the statues surrounding the Ubosat all turned outward, as though preparing for something or someone to arise.
Possession doesn't begin with demons. It doesn't start with screaming or spinning heads. It begins quietly, with a whisper, with surrender, with devotion so deep the soul opens its gates without knowing. And by the 12th night, Preacher's gates were wide open. He had stopped eating. He had stopped questioning. He no longer feared the abbot's voice inside him. In truth, he barely noticed it, because it had become his own. When the villagers below whispered of bells ringing at dawn, they wondered if the temple had been reclaimed by monks. When one of them climbed halfway up to leave a candle, they saw saffron robes folded neatly by the gate, but no one there to wear them. Just the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of chanting in two voices at once. Inside the Ubosat, Preacher no longer knelt. He stood, eyes open, face serene, body still, unnaturally so, as if waiting for someone to breathe through him. The mirror had vanished, or rather, merged. It no longer stood in the room because it was him. Every motion precise, every word aligned. He moved with the grace of someone who had practiced in another life. The boy no longer waited at the threshold. He was now in the inner sanctuary, kneeling beside Preacher during every ritual, still silent, still willing. His presence alone seemed to stabilize the transition, because that's what this was. Not a haunting, not a possession, a passing of robes, a transference. That morning, Preacher opened his eyes and spoke aloud, not to the room, not to himself, to the statue. Your silence has served its purpose. Now speak through me. The Buddha's lips, cracked and worn, remained shut. But a voice answered, from the walls, from the beams, from the space between seconds. You no longer kneel. You no longer resist. You are ready. The abbot did not take over violently. He slipped in like water through a cracked jar, and Preacher let him. It was easier than doubt, easier than solitude, and it felt good, warm, powerful. He walked the temple grounds without blinking. The grass withered beneath his feet. Statues turned to follow his steps. Flames bowed low in their bowls. And the gates still shut, because the temple no longer needed outsiders. It had its voice again, its body, its host. That evening, a thunderstorm rolled across the northern hills, but no rain touched the temple. Lightning flashed above it, but never struck. The storm passed like a curtain pulled aside, as if nature respected what now lived there, or feared it. Preacher stood before the cracked statue once more. This time, he didn't pray. He placed his hands on its chest, on the split, and whispered, "It's time." And from inside the stone came the sound of a heartbeat, not loud, but deep, final. Suddenly, the boy beside him gasped. His eyes rolled back, his lips parted, and from his mouth came the final verse of the Sayasat ritual, a chant no one had taught him, a chant that hadn't been spoken in 70 years, the last missing line. And with it, the air tore, not physically, spiritually, a rip in the veil between what was and what should not be. The Buddha's statue shuddered. The crack spread slowly until the entire body trembled, and then it collapsed inward, not shattered, emptied, like a shell no longer needed. Dust swirled upward in a spiral, not chaotic, but deliberate. A release, a rebirth, a spirit freed to step into the body prepared for it. Preacher's spine arched, his mouth opened, his arms outstretched. And for a moment, just a moment, the abbot's face appeared like a mask over his own. Flickering, fading,
then fusing. Not two men anymore. One. When he opened his eyes, they were no longer soft, no longer preachas. They were ancient, focused, triumphant. The boy collapsed beside him, still breathing, still alive, but now hollow. His role had been fulfilled, his purpose complete. And as the storm echoed far in the distance, Preacha spoke, now fully Ajahn Kachorn, reborn. The temple is cleansed, the ritual is whole, the shell is mine. And the monk statues around the Ubosot bowed.
It is said that no ritual is complete without a blessing. But here, in Wat Nong Sang, a blessing did not come with holy water or lotus petals. Here, a blessing came through blood. Because devotion to the wrong spirit becomes offering, and belief, when misled, becomes fuel. The ritual was nearly whole. The vessel had been chosen. The soul had returned. But one thing remained, the final sealing, the last act of willing surrender, not by the vessel, but by the believer, the boy, the one who had come with bowed head and silver bowl. He had prayed, fasted, and waited. He had carried the silence of the forest inside him, and now he carried something else. Something that vibrated behind his ribs like a bell struck too softly to hear, but felt in every bone. The abbot, reborn in Preacha's form, stood before the altar. His back was straight, his fingers precise, his eyes heavy with time, and in his voice, both soft and commanding, he called, "Child, come forward." The boy rose without hesitation. He stepped between the kneeling statues. The air grew warm, then heavy, then still, as if time itself had paused, watching. "You came through the gate," the abbot said. "You brought the egg. You brought the prayer. Now, bring the rest." The boy knelt, eyes closed, lips murmuring something ancient, not in Thai nor Pali, but in the chant language of Sayatsat, the forgotten tongue, the devout whisper of those who gave more than worship. From beneath his robe, the abbot produced a blade, small, curved, old. Its handle was carved from bone, its edge still sharp, still stained from the last offering made 70 years ago. The boy did not flinch. He raised his chin, offered his throat, but the abbot shook his head. Not there. The gate must not close in silence. It must close in sound. He took the boy's hand, placed the blade in it, turned the child toward the temple door. "You must offer it yourself." Outside, the bells rang once. No one pulled them. Inside, the wind began to spiral, the statues hummed, and from the cracked earth beneath the uboset, a red mist began to rise. The boy stepped forward, bare feet pressing onto stone long soaked in forgotten rituals. He raised the blade and cut. Not deep, just enough. Across his palm. The blood dripped slowly, rhythmically, like a drumbeat. He walked to the gate, pressed his hand to the threshold, and let the blood smear the wood. Then
The earth sighed, a release, a warmth, a closing. Inside the uboset, the abbot chanted, each syllable rolled out like thunder through bone. The language was foreign yet familiar, the kind of chant no living monk dared speak, not because it was evil, but because it was unforgiving. The boy returned. He knelt before the abbot and spoke clearly, "It is done," then collapsed, breathing, but pale, exhausted, used. The abbot walked to him, knelt, and whispered something into the boy's ear. The child smiled, a thin, fading smile, and slipped into sleep. Not death, but something close, a sleep that holds the soul still. Then the abbot turned to the altar. The cracked remains of the Buddha statue lay scattered around it, now empty, now not necessary. And where the statue had once stood, a new seat had been prepared. Polished stone, dark silk cushions, and above it a hanging cloth embroidered with a single phrase, "One body, one voice." The abbot sat, folded his legs, closed his eyes, and whispered, "May the temple remain open, so the world may never be." The wind stopped, the bells silenced, the trees bowed, and in the distant village, dogs began to howl, one by one, as though announcing a birth or mourning a soul they could no longer recognize. By morning, the gates of Wat Nong Sang remained shut, but behind them, smoke rose softly, not from fire, but from incense, as if a new monk had taken residence and resumed the rituals. Villagers spoke of it carefully, softly. Some said the temple had been purified. Others knew better, because they remembered what had happened decades ago, and they saw now that it was happening again.
Dawn came, soft, muted, colorless. The sun rose beyond the hills of Chiang Mai, but its light never fully touched the forest around Wat Nong Sang. Mist clung to the trees like mourning robes. Birds flew wide circles around the temple's crown, and at the gates, still sealed shut, the blood had dried into a perfect arc, a red crescent, a seal of completion. Inside the temple was still, too still, the kind of silence that does not wait, but watches. The scent of incense drifted through the ubosat, though no sticks had been lit. The air was warm, yet nothing burned. At the center of the prayer hall sat the new statue, carved in black stone, seated in lotus posture, eyes open, lips gently pursed, and its face was Preach's. A perfect likeness, down to the lines under the eyes, the soft angle of his jaw, even the threadbare robe across its shoulders. It looked peaceful. It looked eternal. It looked almost alive. Tourists came weeks later, led by stories, drawn by rumors. They climbed the hill with phones and cameras, expecting ruins. Instead, they found perfection. The temple had been restored. The paint was fresh, the floors swept, offerings placed with reverent care. And yet not a single monk was seen. No one answered their calls. No one greeted them. Only the open door of the prayer hall and the statue that watched from within. They stepped in quietly,
shoes off, whispers hushed. And one by one, they stood before the black stone statue, admiring, studying, unsettled. Because while the hands rested in peace, the eyes seemed to follow, not through movement, but through something deeper, an awareness behind the stone. One tourist, an older woman, reached out without thinking, touched the base of the statue, and flinched. It was warm, not like sun-warmed rock, warm like flesh, like something still breathing. She left quickly, did not speak of it, but never returned. The villagers said nothing. They had learned long ago, silence keeps the temple from turning its gaze outward. Because the ritual is not just about one man, not just about the abbot, not even about preacher. It's about the pattern, the cycle, the gate, the one that never seals completely. That night, a child from the village woke screaming. He told his mother he saw a monk in his dream, smiling, holding a staff, tapping it slowly on the stone floor of the temple. And when she asked what the monk had said, the child whispered, "He asked me to visit. He said he's lonely. He said I look like I'd listen." Back in the Ubosat, moonlight poured through the slats in the roof, soft, silver. It touched the statue's face, and for a moment, just one, the statue blinked. Not stone, not entirely. A flicker, a twitch, like something deep inside had stirred, as if it were listening, as if it were awake. And if one were to stand close enough to see past the polished eyes, past the surface, they might glimpse something watching back, something patient, something old, something waiting. Because the ritual never ends. The gate may close, but the temple never seals.